Hi guys, I have some very exciting news. So this week I signed the contract for my second book. And what's my second book about? Well, it's about the famous foundation myth of Britain. The story that Brutus of Troy, or rather Brutus, a descendant from the Trojan royal family, migrated from Italy to Britain just a few generations after the Trojan War. So this story, this legend, was widely believed in medieval times, but in more modern times it has come to be completely universally dismissed as a fictional story invented by medieval monks to try to just give some prestige to the ancient Britons by connecting them to the Trojans. That's how it's viewed now. But my new book, is a very serious attempt to try to demonstrate that actually this story, this legend, is firmly supported by the archaeological evidence, most significantly, also by ancient written evidence, going back even as early as just 200 years after the event was supposed to have happened, and cultural evidence as well, even genetic evidence. All these things, all these different types of evidence support every stage of the migration. The migration from Troy to Italy, and then a few generations later the migration from Italy to Gaul, and then immediately afterwards to Britain. Every stage of that migration is supported by copious amounts of all these different types of evidence, with archaeology being the most significant one. And the fact it's supported clearly by the archaeology is a very, very important part that I want to emphasize. This isn't some fanatical book that tries to argue there's some conspiracy trying to hide the true origins of the Britons or anything like that. I'm not into conspiracy theories. Obviously, I think that a lot of the currently accepted conclusions, like for example about this legend, are wrong, but that doesn't mean I think there's a conspiracy theory trying to hide it. I just think there are certain bits of evidence that maybe a lot of people haven't really pieced together, and that's largely because of a lot of the time there might be a particular version of a story which is very famous to us today, but is not actually the earliest version of that story, and the earliest version of that story would lead you to a totally different conclusion, a conclusion which most people have missed because it's not the most famous version of that story today. You'll see what I mean when you read the book, but my point is I think there's a lot of evidence that people have missed, but I'm not saying there's any conspiracy theory. I definitely don't believe that. Also, a key part of my book is about a revision in the date of the Trojan War. That's a very key part of my book. So I think the Trojan War happened centuries later than commonly believed. But my book is not the only book actually to suggest such a thing. There are actually loads of books from loads of different researchers that suggest that the Trojan War happened centuries later than commonly believed. But what all those other books have in common is that to do this, they try to suggest a revision in the chronology of the entire archaeological sequence of the Middle East and the Near East. So, for example, they might try to bring forward the chronology of the archaeology of Egypt, for example, like the chronology from David Roll, for instance. He brings forward Ramesses the Great, Ramesses II, by, I think it's roughly 200 or maybe 300 years. And other revisions as well do similar things to varying degrees. And so they often also say, by extension, therefore, the Trojan War happened centuries later than commonly believed. But invariably, these revised chronologies are not accepted because there is good archaeological evidence for the currently accepted dates for these ancient cultures like Egypt and Greece and the Hittites and all these other things. That those are pretty solidly established. So invariably these revisions are not accepted. But my book, as far as I am aware, is the only book that suggests a revision to the chronology of the Trojan War and the surrounding Greek legends without adjusting the chronology of the archaeology of Greece and the other Mediterranean nations as well. So my book preserves the currently accepted archaeological sequence, but moves the chronology of the Greek legends. So that, I believe, is unique. I don't think anyone else has ever suggested this pairing. So I think that my book will be far more readily accepted by those who support the currently accepted chronology of the Near East, which I do as well, genuinely. But also I think I make a good case for revising the chronology of the Greek legends, and that is a very key part in seeing the evidence for the migration from Troy to Italy, and then from Italy to Gaul, and then Britain. So all that will be explained in my book, as well as the historical identifications of well over a dozen of the characters involved in the Trojan War and the other Greek legends from around that time, such as even Hercules himself. And that might seem shocking, like, really? Hercules? But actually Hercules is one of the most obvious, most easy to spot ones once the chronology is revised appropriately. Also, people like Agamemnon, Midas, many of the Egyptian kings who feature in the legends of the Trojan War and the surrounding legends as well. Well over a dozen, nearly 24 of these legendary characters are identified as historical figures from this later time period when I place the Trojan War. So that is what I've presented in my latest book, as well as obviously the evidence for the legend of the Brutus migration and the identity of Brutus himself. So all that is going to be in my next book, which hopefully should be released sometime, I'm hoping early next year. I don't know exactly when. All I know is I need to get the completed manuscript submitted to the publishers by January. So, it could be released maybe around the middle of next year or later. But I'm hoping if I can get it sent to them, as soon as possible, well before the end of the year, then hopefully it can be out within the first half of next year. That's what I'm hoping. And I hope that when it is finally released and you guys can read it, I hope you enjoy it. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you think. Until next time.